The Killing of a Chinese Bookie has always seemed to have a bit of an uncertain place in the Cassavetes filmography to me. It debuted not only to infamously bad reviews, but was even outright ignored by much of the film press, and had similarly disastrous audience reactions. Even the cinemas that had made advance bookings cancelled their screenings, forcing Cassavetes to withdraw the film from circulation. Being both entirely self-funded and distributed, and making practically a total loss, he recut the film and made a last attempt to re-release it in a more palatable version, only to be met with even less interest. The disastrous initial release and the confusion surrounding the two versions adds to this uncertainty. The Killing of a Chinese Bookie simply never had its day. Whilst the film is probably offhandedly referred to as a great film or cult classic these days, simply because it's Cassavetes, the appreciation of it is entirely retrospective, and comes from already initiated fans of the filmmaker through revivals and re-releases from Criterion or the BFI in the UK. Another aspect of its kind of uncertain place in film history is also what is most often remarked about the film, that it incorporates elements of genre into the Cassavetes' singular style and methodology. This is often noted as an either spoken or unspoken suggestion that the film is perhaps compromised by this aspect, or that there is at least an incongruity in the film between the personality and strength of his usual work and intrusive demands and conventions of genre. Funnily enough, I think this is a pretty apt description of my thoughts on Gloria, a great film in many ways but somewhat diluted by a sense that Cassavetes was working backwards into his strengths and idiosyncrasies as a filmmaker from a removed starting point. On the other hand, The Killing of a Chinese Bookie is far from waylaid by its genre trappings. The film is perhaps John Cassavetes' most minimalist, conceptual or single-minded film, both narratively and dramatically. It's almost entirely devoted to the depiction of a single character, the Los Angeles club owner Cosmo. It's hard to think of too many films quite so obsessed by its own main character as a subject for distanced observation. Take the example of Taxi Driver, which came out exactly a week before. Taxi Driver often externalises Travis Bickle's perspective, giving the film a strange sense of subjectivity, depicting the real grit of the streets of New York, but with an expressionism that comes bubbling to the surface. In The Killing of a Chinese Bookie, the filmmaker never takes this into Cosmo's head, or externalises his self-delusions. Rather, we observe Cosmo's performative personality just as the other characters do, from the distance both Cosmo, Gazzara and Cassavetes maintain. Subsequently, there is a real Kuleshov effect in play here at first, where the audience is invited to try and break down when you consider Cosmo to be purely performative, when, if ever, he is truly unself-conscious and genuine,
I have to get to the club.
And when, as is most of the time of course, that there is an ambiguous spectrum or balance between the two. However, as the movie progresses, involved viewers become more and more confident in identifying his mannerisms, moods, and underlying motivations.
I'm not dumb, but I'm not a fool. You're gonna be one. Did you call him a fool, Mort? Did I call you a fool?
Suitably, Gazzara's performance is much less emotive than a typical Cassavetes protagonist. Characters that usually notoriously wear their erratic emotions on their sleeves. There are a couple more typical moments of emotive outburst, of course.
But let's let that go. That's too confusing. I confused myself.
But Cosmo also spends a lot of his time alone, or with characters that simply react to him, rather than question or influence. The camera is doggedly fixed on his face, even during dialogue scenes, sometimes almost comedically so, such as in the lengthy opening shot of the original cut, which is criminally broken up and transplanted a little bit later in the film in the shortened version. This shot and the initially unexplained context of this entire scene really primes the audience to develop a penetrative gaze, key to recognising the film's display of an entirely performative personality, a performance that belies a hollowness beneath. This mode of viewership, along with Gazzara's incredible performance, climaxes in a sequence near the end of the film. After Cosmo has been shot and taken refuge at his girlfriend Rachel's house, he is told he is not welcome anymore by Rachel's mother. Cosmo is under no illusions as to the perhaps unlikely power imbalance between the two of them, but as always he sees no other option than to put on an act. But this time, rather than the successful showman and ladies' man, without a care in the world, he is forced to pretend to expose his deep vulnerabilities, with a desperately phony and aimless anecdote about his childhood family life.
She was so funny, she ran off with this big, fat butcher. I don't know where she is.
It may seem at first, for a brief moment, that his act will break, and with it his own delusions, but this does not last long, and his now totally undeniable transparency forces him into rage and further desperation for a new facade.
I don't care. Well, I care!
Well, I don't!
Well, I do!
This scene is perhaps the most disheartening moment in the film, and certainly the point of no return in terms of even the vaguest of possibilities of any kind of salvation or growth for Cosmo. Although Cassavetes leaves the ending open, this constructed reality and performative personality has transcended to a psychosis that will potentially literally kill Cosmo, as Rachel's mother actually tells him.
And you won't go to the doctor. Because you think you're going to live with the bullet in you.
What is of course commonly recognised is that Mr. Sophistication is Cosmo's alter ego, and beyond that the pair of them represent a dark and hollow reflection of Cassavetes, the performer, director, independent artist, hustler, and notorious uncompromising personality. But the important part of this identification is that Cassavetes is perhaps exercising anxieties about his own talent with this film. Cosmo's strip club acts, led by Mr. Sophistication, are of course totally phony, clumsy, pretentious, ramshackle, vain and self-indulgent. All things that many critics accuse Cassavetes of being throughout his entire career.
Paris. Parigi to those of you who are multilingual.
Actually, we had a terrific show. There was a marvelous entertainer there. And she really knocked them. She wowed them.
But Cosmo, like Cassavetes, is also uncompromising. A significant difference between the two cuts is the scene in which the gangsters check back up on Cosmo and offer him two options to repay his debt. In the shorter version, the scene is both longer and largely different, with mostly entirely different footage and dialogue, as well as some alternate takes and angles. In this version, the gangsters' plan and the terms of their negotiation with Cosmo is much clearer. He will not give over any control or profits from the Crazy Horse West.
Look, I'm a club owner. I took a place from nothing and made it into something. I've been Shylocked out to here. I pay my debts.
And so they tried to pressure him into killing the bookie. Eventually they reach an agreement that he will, using the strip club performers, lure the bookie from Chinatown down to the club, presumably allowing the gangsters to ambush or kidnap him in the process.
He loves beautiful girls. You got beautiful girls. Take the girls down to Chinatown. Find him.
In the long version, Cosmo takes the strippers for a day out in Chinatown with no clear objective. But with the re-edited version, now we understand that he could not go through with it, and instead played the ladies' man and took the girls to the cinema. His admonishment of the driver being part of his usual act, covering for his own anxieties and reluctances that caused him to procrastinate and ignore the agreement he had made.
Come on, why don't you come in and get us?
Deep inside, Cosmo refuses to allow the gangsters to involve his club and performers, a place he considers sacred. He tells the gangsters that he has no idea how much the club makes. It certainly doesn't seem to be a lot, and ultimately he would rather try to murder a highly guarded, organised crime member in a last-minute ramshackle plan than to give up any control or ownership of the club, even temporarily. The comparisons naturally make themselves.
If we want to bury the film and never let anyone see it, we can do that. In other words, it's ours.
One of the best and most sincere scenes in the film is when Cosmo takes a moment to check in on the performances at the club, whilst the hit job is falling apart all around him.
And what number is it? Is it the Paris number? The Paris number, for Christ's sake! You've been at the place 7 years. You don't know what the Paris number is?
It's easy to imagine Gazzara pulling from witnessing Cassavetes conducting similar calls. It reminded me of stories surrounding the ambitious nationwide self-distribution of A Woman Under the Influence, in which Cassavetes haggled with theatre owners across the country and would supposedly call friends to visit cinemas showing the film to check if theatre owners were putting on extra screenings and cheating him out of the full box office receipts. Cosmo's performative personality becomes weirdly endearing when seen from this angle. His pride and persona as Cosmo Vitelli, a strip club owner, is based on his independence and showmanship, rather than any business acumen or wealth, which he certainly doesn't have.
All right, Vince, it'll pick up. Have a big night.
The realistically ugly depiction of the club, its patrons, and the world of sleazy LA nightlife belies the sincerity of this character, at least in this one aspect. The pitifully performative Cosmo does in fact have some true character or purpose, even if it's ultimately destructive to himself and victimises those around him. Cassavetes understands this, and that is why he so eschews not just genre norms, but general narrative norms with the end of the film, in which Cosmo revisits the club as if nothing is wrong, as if he is able to literally restore himself as long as the show is able to carry on.
Because what's your truth is my falsehood, what's my falsehood is your truth, and vice versa. Right? And we'll make their lives a little happier, huh? So they won't have to face themselves. They can pretend to be somebody else. Be happy, be joyous.
And so the parallels between Cosmo and Cassavetes in their self-destructive creative compulsions and truly independent attitudes gives the film a resonance for cinephiles, similarly captured by a commercialised and perverse, contradictory, but often ultimately transcendent art form. Furthermore, the Crazy Horse West is populated by, and sheltering, many other strange and tameable figures from the margins of the American film industry. Mr. Sophistication is played by the writer Mead Roberts, who was a long-time friend of Cassavetes and had written a handful of unsuccessful films, usually literary dramas and adaptations, including working under the aegis of Tennessee Williams on the screenplay for The Fugitive Kind, a movie that is actually a kind of personal favourite of mine. His film and TV career had entirely dried up by the late 60s, however. He was not an actor, but Cassavetes assured him he was perfect for the role of a maligned would-be artist. It's easy to imagine how Cassavetes saw Mead Roberts as a perfect fit for the tragic Mr. Sophistication, a role imbued with a self-deprecating personal identification as I discussed earlier.
Look, I don't want to pull a big star bit, but people do come here because I'm, well, some unique kind of personality, I suppose.
He presumably was of the opinion that Roberts was another underappreciated talent with high aspirations, trying to be an artist in a crass, commercial environment like Hollywood.
Who gets the booing? I do. But when things go well, they get the applause and all the cheers because they flash their tip.
Another longtime friend, Timothy Carey, plays Flo, the teeth-clenching mobster who seems to be in a perpetual state of both impatience and epiphany. A notorious and eccentric figure, Carey had a promising early career with bit parts in quite a few significant films. Stanley Kubrick even took an uncharacteristic shine to his loose and unpredictable screen presence.
Yeah, Pops, you could take care of a whole room full of people with that gun. Maybe not kill them all, but then they wouldn't be good for anything afterwards.
But his wild, intimidating personality, constant improvisations, and on-set stunts caused enough notoriety in Hollywood to stifle his mainstream career. Cassavetes considered Carey a fellow maverick. Carey wrote, directed, and starred in his own underground film, The World's Greatest Sinner, in 1962, and would try for the rest of his life to get similarly wild projects off the ground. A common anecdote I found looking into Carey is that he was apparently evangelically obsessed with farts.
Enough, I didn't hire Timothy Carey because I'd heard he was so crazy. He had this thing, this passion going on about farting. All right, it was like almost like a religion to him, that people killed themselves by holding in their flagellants.
What no one seems to have noticed is that Carey slipped this obsession into the longer cut of The Killing of a Chinese Bookie, during the scene in which Flo takes Cosmo to a parking garage.
It's a great enjoyment of good crap. You know what's wrong with the world, Cosmo, including me and everybody else that might be here? The whole world needs a fart at the same time.
This scene was shot in typical Cassavetian excess, with apparently hours of Carey improvising.
That jerk Karl Marx said opium was the religion of the people. I got news for him. It's money.
One of the other eccentric performers populating the sidelines is Hadji. Hadji was one of exploitation director Russ Meyer's favourite actresses, appearing in 5 of his films, including as a lead in Motor Psycho and Faster Pussycat Kill Kill.
Now I'm gonna spit dry you!
However, Hadji was also a genuine LA strip club performer, as were Donna Mae Gordon and Alice Friedland, who played Margot and Sherry. Azizi Johari, meanwhile, was a nude model, including for Playboy magazine. Although she never really had a movie career, she is in fact probably best remembered today for her photos featured prominently during a scene in The Shining. As usual, many parts were filled out with family members, friends and non-actors. For instance, Rachel's mother was played by a waitress Cassavetes met at an LA burger chain, and for some reason had promised to cast in a future movie. The resultant effect of all this can be quite hard to reconcile. There is an undeniable feeling of realism to the movie, despite all of these alternately extroverted and amateurish performances. Not to mention the crime film skeleton plot, the intrusively low budget, Cassavetes' disregard for maintaining the typical illusions of continuity or immersion in either editing or cinematography. These things all serve to preserve some feeling of the awkwardness and even dullness of reality, the ugliness of a 70s era strip club. But then, the more I become obsessed with the film, the more it seems to really be an expressionistic caricature of Hollywood, beyond even the recognised parallels between Cassavetes, Cosmo and Mr. Sophistication. The Crazy Horse West itself is a kind of Sunset Boulevard-style darkened hideout on the outskirts of Hollywood, saturated in a dirty coloured haze, built and protected by Cosmo, who gives his life to keeping it uncontaminated. Behind the camera, it's created by Cassavetes, for those he considers too idiosyncratic, too creative, too unique, and too plain good for Hollywood. After a while, it sometimes starts to look a little bit beautiful.